Good afternoon, ladies. I am just making a short video to show you how to prepare your papers to make the poppy block that we're going to start together this evening. So first of all, what I've done is highlighted each section that you're going to cut from each of the 3 copies of the pattern that you photocopied for me. So section 1 is there, section 2 is the middle section, and section 3 is your left-hand side section. Okay, you need to add seam allowances to all of these, so when they're cut out, they will look like this. Okay, so that's section 1, that is section 2, and then this is section 3. Okay. So the next thing we'll need to do is number the order that we are going to sew the fabrics to the actual paper foundations. Right, so the next stage is to number the order you are going to sew the fabrics onto the paper in. This is to make sure that every time you add the next seam, it is covering the raw edges of the previous seam. So I'm going to number these. So the letter U is going to become fabric number 1. The letter T is going to become fabric number 2. The letter S is fabric number 3. And the letter R is fabric number 4. Okay. Right, on section 2, the first fabric on is W, and that's number 1. Then number 2 is fabric V. Number 3 is V reversed, and number 4 is Z. And in section 3, we're going to put U reversed on first, which is number 1, T reversed on second, which is number 2, S reversed on third, which is number 3, and R reversed on fourth, which is number 4. Okay. So the final thing I do before I start thinking about fabrics is just make a note of whether the fabric, the section is either background fabric or it is a leaf or a stem or detail fabric. So I just go round and mark where my background fabrics are. Section 1 is going to be background. So I just put BG on it. And section S is also 3 is going to be background. Okay, using the pattern, the picture on the pattern, I'm just making sure. Doesn't matter what colours these are, doesn't matter what colour T is, doesn't matter what colour R is, doesn't matter what colour you choose for your background fabric. It's just so that when you start placing the fabrics, you know which one is which. And I do that on each section. So on section 2, section 2 is background, piece 3 is background, and piece 4 is background. So I only have piece 1, which is actually the stem of the flower. And then on section 3, again, piece 1 is background and piece 3 is background. It just gives me some kind of reminder of where my fabric placements are. Right, the next thing I do is just roughly cut my pieces of fabric to about the sizes that I need them to be. So my first piece of fabric is going to be number 1 on section 1. So I need a piece roughly so that it covers the lines, and I literally take a pair of scissors and cut it off. Now I need a reversed one of those for section 3, so I will use the rest of this piece of fabric to do that. Cut it off roughly about the same size. Okay, so I then go round with my pieces of fabric. So my next piece of fabric is T, which is number 2. So I'm going to do about that. It will, no, maybe a bit bigger than that. So we'll just cut this piece in half. So I need one for section 1 and one for section 3. So I'm just going to roughly cut this in half. Nice and generous, nice and easy. So it needs to cover beyond all the seam allowances on the fabric. So it needs to go down and overlap on the center fabrics. So next piece is background again. So I want piece 3 this time. So I'm going to do something about there. So cut that piece off about there, and that should give me enough for piece 3. Okay, so that's piece 3. I need piece 3 on section 3 as well, so we'll cut another piece off the background about the same. So I have one on each side because they're section 1 and 3 are mirror images, and then my final piece is piece 4, and I'm going to use this fabric. So again, I want something that covers from top to bottom. I'm just going to cut this off straight at the end because it's easier not to have any strange angles to start with, and cut that one off like that, and repeat the process for section 3. So that's section 1 and 3 pieces ready. Okay, so I pile them up on top of their piece of paper. So this is section 3 with its pieces of fabric. So stack them out of the way, and so the only thing we have left to do is section 2. Okay, so section 2, my first one is piece number 1, which again I'm going to use this fabric for. So just roughly lay it and cut it. Okay, and then I need a section for, that was close, for section 4, which is there, and then I hope that this, if I fold it in half, will do pieces 2 and 3. It will. So I can fold this in half, cut it along the middle there, and that is for section 3 and section 2. Okay. Okay, so our next stage is to actually sew fabric to paper. You're going to put the fabric on the non-printed side of the paper so you can see the printed, because you're going to stitch on these lines. So my first piece goes on, and you need to make sure that you can see that the fabric is bigger than the actual piece that you're sewing onto. When you're happy with that, for this very first piece, I pin away from where you're going to stitch it to the paper. It's the only time I pin most these fabrics, but this very first piece you just need it not to move about. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fold the paper and the fabric along the stitching line. Okay, and just finger press it. Okay, so you get a crease on your fabric that shows you where your stitching line is. I'm then going to take my next piece of fabric, I'm going to put it right sides together, so you've got right sides uppermost on the wrong side of the paper without the printing on for the first piece, and your right side goes to your right side of your first piece. So the second piece, you need to make sure that it covers the seam line, the fold line, and to check that, I fold again with both layers of fabric there, unfold it, and make sure that I have got a crease with plenty of fabric. My final check before I stitch anything is to fold on that fold line, making sure that piece 2 covers all of my paper. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is sew. So we're ready. We turn it over onto the printed side of the paper. We're taking our stitch length down to about 1 to 1 1/4, so it's a very short stitch length. This allows you to get the paper off the fabric at a later stage, and then we are going to sew across the printed line, following the line all the way across, nice and steady. Take your time, and it's just, you need it just to extend beyond the line it intersects. When you've done that, take it out. Okay, get rid of that. So we can then fold it back down and check that everything lies and covers all your pieces. Okay, so I then finger press nice and hard with that, and I take my extra seam allowance off. It doesn't have to be accurate. A pair of scissors will do fine. Roughly eyeball 1/4 inch trim off down to 1/4 inch. Okay, finger press them down. I take my pin out of my first piece now because it's anchored in place, and we're now ready to put piece 3 on. So again, my first thing I do is I fold along the line we are going to stitch on, so it gives me a crease line on my fabric. Okay, so you can see there's now a crease on that line. I'm then going to take my next piece of background fabric, and again, same process, right sides to right sides. I'm going to make sure my piece of fabric covers my fold line, and I'm just going to flip it along the fold line to make sure it covers the piece of fabric that I am, the piece of stitching that I am about to do. It doesn't, we need to move it up. Do I need to do it that way around? So make sure it does, and again fold it across, make sure it covers your paper, which it now does. So I got my fold line, fold all the creases, so I've got a crease in everything, making sure that I've got some seam allowance on all of it, and then we should be able to stitch along my second stitching line. So again, nice and steady, just follow the line. Okay, tidy up your ends, because I like tidy ends, and then we should be able to fold it across, making sure it covers all your paper. Okay, you can see that covers all the paper. So again, fold the paper back, pop those couple of stitches that have extended, trim back down to about 1/4 inch, eyeball it, and cut off the excess. Again, finger press it down, and then our final piece to be added. So again, same process again. We need to fold along what will be our final stitching line for this piece, and press. Gives you an idea of where your fabric needs to lie. So we then again, right sides to right sides, put your fabric piece over the folded edge, fold to make sure that you've got a line, and then just flip it all back to make sure it's covering all the paper, which it is. Okay, so hanging on to that for grim death, we're just going to stitch. That's just shifted slightly, so just need to make sure when you turn it over that if it's shifted, turn it back, make sure you've got everything in the right place and that you're happy. And then again, nice and steady, follow. Your seam line. So one final check that you've covered all your paper, that everything is well covered. Again, fold your paper back, and then with a pair of scissors just trim down, eyeball to about 1/4 of an inch. Okay, flatten it out, finger press it down. At this point, I would take it to the ironing board and give it a good press. And then I will show you how to trim it in just a moment. Right, so the section's now all nicely pressed, ready for trimming. So if we turn this over, what we're going to do with the trimming is we're going to put our 1/4 inch marker on our actual sewing line for the block. So you're going to put that on that line there, giving you the 1/4 inch seam allowance you'll need to actually join it together. Take the rotary cutter and just take off your excess, tidy it up. Okay, and then we're going to go repeat that process all the way around on all the sides. So again, putting your 1/4 inch marker on the actual what will be your stitching line and taking your excess fabric off nice and neatly. Okay, so again, 1/4 inch line on your stitching line for the block, and then trim down. Okay, and then finally my last little one there. So there is your block ready to be joined to the other two sections. You now need to just repeat the processes following your number order, so putting your fabric number 1 down first, then fabric number 2 and sewing it. Repeat the process for the other 2 pieces, and then you join the pieces together, making your completed block.